Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. State lawmakers don't all agree on making the state's property tax cap permanent. Now, the state Senate signed off on Governor Cuomo's proposal on Wednesday, freezing annual increases at 2%. Now, the cap was passed in 2011 and extended for 4 years in 2015. It would have expired soon. It was especially relevant to wealthy and rapidly growing communities which sought to raise property taxes to pay for ever-increasing expenses. The New York State Association of Counties Executive Director Stephen Aquario, who's been on this program, praised the bill, saying, quote, anything government can do to stabilize and lower property taxes is welcome news for homeowners and businesses. But the Assembly, which has a much higher proportion of members in and around New York City, has been less inclined to passing it in years past, including now. Joining us right now to explain why and what the property tax cap means to all of us here in New York State is Empire Center for Public Policy Executive Director E.J. McMahon. Thank you again for joining us here on Empire State Weekly.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So this is a confusing issue. What exactly is, just briefly, the property tax cap, and why was it imposed in the first place?
Well, at its core, it's simple. It was a proposal. It was practically the only detailed proposal that Governor Cuomo ran on when he was first elected in 2010. And he proposed it because, out of recognition, as others have recognized, that we have very high property taxes in New York, and they've been going up a lot, especially school taxes, which are the largest share of our tax bill. So as he proposed it in 2011, when he took office, the tax cap caps the tax levy. The tax levy is the total amount of property taxes that counties, towns, cities, and villages and school districts, it's the total amount they vote to raise every year from the taxable property within their boundaries. And so that total is capped in the first instance at 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. And actually inflation has been less than 2% in some recent years. Now, when the governor proposed it, he proposed it as a standalone permanent law in 2011 was what he proposed. As part of the deal and negotiations with then Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver, the tax cap was linked to an issue that is of concern almost entirely to New York City, which is the only jurisdiction in the state to which the tax cap doesn't apply. And in that case, it was made a provision of the New York City rent regulations, which are imposed by state law, which of course have nothing to do with the property taxes in the rest of the state, but it was like a political linkage. Well, that law has been quote unquote temporary for 45 years.
So therefore the expiration date on
every
the tax
few
cap,
years it expires, and thus when it expires, the tax cap is not supposed to last beyond more than a year beyond that law. That law next expires in mid-June of this year. It'll be extended in some form. There's some members who want to actually eliminate it and return all power over rents to New York City. But in any case, if you have any law that's temporary, much less linked to another totally unrelated thing that's also temporary, that is a potential for mischief. Basically, that means that every few years there's a chance for somebody to mess around with it, and that's the concern here.
You've simplified it for us.
So for the tax cap, which affects so many people who own property in New York State and pay their taxes, as we heard, Stephen Aquario said, listen, one good thing about making it permanent is that then we know what we're dealing with. And this has been quite an adjustment period, and maybe the municipalities weren't so excited about the idea of a tax cap, but they've come around. Now, though, they have a couple of concerns. And those concerns, they say, could lead to them having to cut services. They've done a lot of consolidation already. But two things. One, as Stephen Aquario said, we like the fact that this is in place. At the same time, he put a little aside in there that if we start losing population or continue losing population, that tax base is shrinking, leaving fewer people to pay the taxes.
Got to make it up somewhere.
So that's one concern they have. The other one, maybe we'll get into in a minute, about the reduction in AIM funding. First of all, the idea of the shrinking population base. Is that a valid concern?
I would say the one reason the population base is shrinking, which in absolute terms is only happening upstate, that high taxes are in fact a reason, a contributing factor in that. I should interject here something that is often missed entirely in this discussion. The property tax cap doesn't actually cap property taxes. Let me put it this way.
Okay.
The property tax cap doesn't mean that taxes cannot be increased. Repeat, it doesn't mean that they can't increase taxes. It is meant to create an added level of difficulty in raising taxes, which is very easily surpassed. In fact, Albany County, the very first year of the tax cap, increased its tax levy something like 15 or 18%. What you need to do is the governing body of a county or municipality has to vote, 60% of the members have to vote to do it. That's the override. In a school district, 60% of the voters have to do it. So they can, if a local official says, this is terrible, it's cramping our style, there's something we really need to do for the people of fill-in-the-blank town,
Right.
The answer is, well, go ahead and do it.
Right.
And we've seen that in some cases where it's been turned down without the 60% or it's been approved with the
Right.
60%.
Right.
I guess the concern here, though, is that Diane was bringing up is, are municipalities and school districts going to find another way? Are they simply going to
Or are they
go
gonna
around
cut
it?
services?
Or cut their services?
No, they don't have, no. There's absolutely nothing to that. Actually, there is almost only one, outright opponent to making the tax cap permanent. One big, powerful opponent, and that is the New York State United Teachers Union. Because the tax cap has had its greatest impact on school taxes, which were increasing by far at the greatest rate relative to inflation and enrollment for decades up until this tax cap. The main thing schools spend on, far and away, 60 to 70% of their budgets at least, is teacher salaries and other forms of compensation. This would restrain the growth in teacher union contracts. Naturally, the union doesn't like that. So there is no other really primary opponent to this. You hear local officials kind of griping, which again is kind of ironic because outside of school districts where the public gets to vote on the budget and gets to vote, and you need 60% of a public vote, which by the way, overwhelmingly has happened. It's not really a big challenge. In towns, a supermajority of a town board is the same as a simple majority, so
Why
it makes
has
no
the
difference.
Assembly in the past been against this?
You put your finger on one reason right up in the beginning. There's two reasons, really. The first big reason is politically, the Assembly's largest critical mass of members is from New York City. Well, mainly in New York City in particular, which is not affected by the property tax cap. It doesn't have the property tax cap. That's number one. It's not a majority of the Assembly as a whole, but it's the dominant faction in the Assembly Democratic Caucus. Number two, it's the power of the teachers union, which is even greater in the Assembly than in the new Senate. The new Senate majority did something that the old Senate Republican majority used to do every year. They passed the permanent tax cap. They just did it this week. The Assembly has been cooler to the whole idea. That's why then Speaker Silver needed a deal of a different sort to do it in the first place 8 years ago. I would point out, by the way, Sheldon Silver himself proposed a different version of an inflation-based tax cap 24 years ago, which nobody seems to remember. I mean, this is, if you want to keep your eye on the ball here, the ball is whether the tax cap is made permanent is the one question. The second question is, if it's made permanent, do they drill loopholes in it or try to make it easier to get around, particularly for school districts? And that will reflect the power of the teachers union.
All right, well, I think a lot of
We
people
need
agree.
another 10 minutes each.
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree it's headed in the right direction if it goes there. Well, listen, thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us, E.J. McMahon for the Empire Center for Public Policy. It's good to have
You're
you
welcome.
on Empire State Weekly again.
Thank you.
Well, coming up today, state police are on high alert after an alleged plot to bomb a Muslim community in the Western Catskills. How authorities were able to prevent it from happening in the first place.